Welcome back to Uncomfortable Truths We Avoid. This is episode 5, Survival Mode. The uncomfortable truth is, when we are in survival mode, it usually helps us to continue functioning in an everyday life, but we slowly start to lose ourselves in the process. This episode is mainly about what happens when we are in unhealthy situations or unhealthy relationships for so long. Maybe we're ignoring so many things that we're just shutting ourselves out. We're shrinking. Now, when we do this, people can notice that we might be quieter. We might not be hanging around with them as much. Maybe, we're so confused. We don't know what to do at this point. So it's not always dramatic. It's not always visible, but it happens when you're just barely getting through the day, or you're just thinking, you know what, as long as I can get through the day and we don't argue, that's going to be enough for me, as long as it's quiet. So this is about really understanding what it looks like when you're holding it together or barely holding it together, and how we actually begin to cope or begin to change or begin to shrink. One of the things that usually happens when you are in survival mode or in some type of relationship in which you have to be in survival mode, you usually become hyper aware of everything. So even if you were a survivor of a relationship that wasn't so healthy, or maybe you are in one right now, you are always hyper aware of everything. And what I mean by this is you can really peg people pretty well. You know if somebody has a change in the tone of their voice, if they have something different about their face, like facial expressions. You can usually pick up energy in the room much better than anyone else. You have certain timing in conversations because you're so used to dodging certain things when you're talking to the person you're in a toxic relationship with. But usually you can tell what's happening with someone the minute they walk through the door, because you've become hyper aware of everything around you, because you're trying to avoid conflict, because your everyday life is conflict. So it usually teaches you to read the room before you can relax, if that makes sense. And those of you who can relate to this understand where I'm coming from, because you're always watching. You're always you're anticipating, you're preparing, you're always coming back with a rebuttal. So when you are actually talking to somebody, you're probably already thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say to this? You're not even really truly listening, because you've been in this mode for so long where you're trying to basically fight for yourself. You don't know how else to be. So this is one of the biggest things that happen. And this is one of the biggest things that people don't realize, because your body starts to act like, you're in survival mode, and you don't ever really have a moment to fully exhale, because you're always wondering when the next ball is going to drop. So it's sort of like walking on eggshells 24/7. If you're currently in a relationship that you are having to do this, and you are feeling like you're hypercritical, hyper aware of things, this is a sign that it's probably not a healthy situation. We just sort of blow things off and we say, oh, well, it's normal. I just want to know what they're feeling right now, so I know how to act. But you're a human being, and you should be able to just exhale sometimes. One of the common things you start doing when you are in survival mode is you start shrinking to stay safe. And what I mean by this is you are constantly, I don't mean that you're physically shrinking. I mean that you are emotionally, mentally, spiritually shrinking little by little. You start saying less. You start asking for less. You start expecting less. You You stop bringing things up because you don't want to have to deal with an argument. So you just don't bring it up anymore. You don't speak freely anymore, because if you say something a certain way, it might be taken out of context and then there's going to be a fight. You just generally don't take up much space anymore. So you're shrinking yourself so that you can accommodate this situation. And somewhere along the line, you realize that being yourself completely is risky, because you might jeopardize the already frail relationship that you have. So you just don't say anything. And you're quiet. You might be more agreeable than usual because you just don't care to fight. And you're just a lot less expressive because you don't want to deal with the aftermath. A lot of people in survival mode don't become dramatic. They don't become like these grandiose people. A lot of people just shrink and become smaller because we don't want to have to deal with it. So if you notice some of these things going on in your life, it could be because you're just overloaded. You don't want to deal with the situation. That's one of the saddest parts, because from the outside, when people are looking from the outside, they just think you're just so patient, you're calm, you're patient. And on the inside, you're completely erasing who you are. And that's the saddest part, It's like over time, you don't even notice how much you've actually put away, because you're putting away so much, you're just losing yourself. And you don't even really care at that point because you're just so checked out. Another thing that starts to happen sometimes is you confuse silence for peace. You start thinking, well, maybe if we're not arguing, nobody's fighting, then everything's fine. Like nothing bad's happening right now and things are okay. I'm just going to settle into this until the next blow up, till the next fight, but silence isn't always peace. It's sometimes just what happens when you avoid making things worse, when you are silent and you don't say anything. It honestly, survival mode and silence feels safer at some point, and you just don't say anything. You're swallowing all the things that hurt you, so you're just doing this so that you can protect everyone else, so that nobody else's boat gets rocked and nobody else is upset. So you're just swallowing all of this because you want to keep the peace. And that's tension. That's tension without sound, but you don't recognize it because when survival mode takes over, it's like you're starting to feel like the safest option is just you avoiding your truth. And that's really what it's all about. You're not going to say anything. You're just going to stay quiet. And that is absolutely not okay. That's not normal. It's not healthy. But in the moment, it's what we accept because we've been in survival mode for so long. When we're going in survival mode, many times we are very functional, but we're absolutely not okay. So sometimes, we look completely competent. I think this part is important because this is why so many people go unseen when they're struggling, because you go to work, you take care of your kids, you take care of your responsibilities, you still show up, you're helping everyone, you're happy, or you're what appears to be happy. Because from the outside, people look at you and it appears like you're doing fine. And inside, you're actually completely numb. You're exhausted. You're tired. You're a shell of who you were in the past. You are disconnected. You're running on fumes at this point. And survival mode just doesn't always look messy. It doesn't look like a train wreck. It looks like you're competent. It looks like you're fine, and I think that's why so many people just blend right in when they're going through this, because they're still producing, they're still fine, they're okay, they're surviving, but that's not the same as living. Let's not confuse that, because some people are carrying their pain so quietly that the people closest to them don't even realize how much they're holding. We become really good actors and actresses. We're really good at covering things up. I used to say that I could have won an Academy Award. I was so good at it. I wanted to keep up the facade, and I think I did a pretty good job of it. But inside, I was completely numb. But I mean, hey, at this point, that's how I learned to run. I learned to run on pure stress. So, unfortunately, that's something that I've carried into life now. You know, um, it's just something that happens as we go along. One of the biggest parts of being in survival mode that I think is key, or is such a big part of this whole conversation, is that you stop knowing what is you and what is survival. You have no idea. You can't identify it anymore, because after a while, you don't even know what your personality is. Is it my personality, or is it just adaptation at this point? Because I don't know. I'm so lost at this point. You don't know if you're naturally anxious anymore, or if you've just lived in tension for so long, that's who you are. You don't know, and it's really sad. It's so sad. You don't know if you're truly low maintenance, or if you've just trained yourself not to need anything, because you're just kind of keeping it down the line, right? I mean, you don't know if you're really, quiet, or maybe you just learned that it's safer to just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything, and that's the scariest part, is that after a while, it can start to feel like this is who you are now. You don't even know really who you were before, because this is who you are now. So that's scary. You're not even yourself anymore. And you've come to accept that. And that's why it's so hard to break out of. It's not something you can just move along with, because once something is familiar to you and once something is normal, you don't question it anymore. You just go with the flow. And that's what so many of us have done. That's what so many of us do. You start feeling, maybe this is just who I am, and sometimes it's not who you are. A lot of the times it's who you became to survive. So those are really not the same thing when you're looking at the big picture here. Becoming who you are to survive. Your standards start to shift. Okay? There's one more thing that I want to touch on today, and I think it matters probably more than a lot of things. Your standards shift, and it changes what actually feels normal. I mean, the things that would have shocked you before, that you would have absolutely not gone along with, absolutely not. I will not put up with this, right? Those things, they don't even register anymore. You will accept such blatant disrespect because it doesn't even register on the radar anymore. You don't even care. I mean, things that would have made you leave early on, they become things you just sigh about, and you're just like, I'm just going to keep moving on, keep trucking through, and the bar gets lower and lower and lower and lower. There's no more standards anymore. They're out the window. They're gone. They don't exist. The excuses are easier. The reactions are quieter. When you stay too long, Dysfunction stops feeling shocking and it just feels familiar, like an old friend, you know? It's what you know. So you just sort of go along with it. That's the part that makes survival mode so dangerous. I mean, it's not because you're a weak person, because some of the strongest people have been through this. I consider myself to be a very strong person, okay? And I don't feel that I'm not stupid, I'm not weak, but because people can adapt to almost anything when they feel like they have no other choice, it becomes easy. It's quite scary, honestly. And if you find yourself in this situation, maybe it's time to evaluate the big picture. Because when you look at this, or if you look at your history and you think if there's ever been a time you've been through this, you start thinking, man, it's true. You shouldn't have to shrink because of all of these things you ignored, because of everything you accepted. So if you're listening to this tonight, I want to be clear about something. You are absolutely not weak because you've adapted to a situation. Survival mode is absolutely not a character flaw. It's a response. It's what happens when your mind, when your body, when your heart are all trying to get you through something and it's just gone on for too long. And you're not broken for adapting. You're human. And just because something protected you once, it doesn't mean that it deserves to run your entire life. So you don't have to stay stuck in that. You don't have to stay there. I mean, it did protect you at one time, and this is why you used it. But don't let it take over. It's not talked about enough how this takes over so many lives. Again, it's an uncomfortable truth. So we don't discuss it because we're trying to keep a beautiful, glowing, sparkling bow on everything, because everything is perfect and my life is great and my family is perfect. I have the perfect family, the perfect husband, the perfect boyfriend. I mean, come on, be real. Nobody's perfect. I mean, I think that survival mode can absolutely help you get through a season of your life, but you should not stay stuck in that season. And if you have noticed that it has cost you things, if it has cost you your voice, if it has cost you your peace, your ability to relax, your ability to just trust yourself with decisions, okay? Your ability to know what you want as a person. If it has cost you any of that, then this is your sign to exit, okay? Exit stage left or exit stage right, whatever it is. But come on. I mean, there's going to come a point where the very things that protected you are going to start preventing you from living fully. And this is something that I learned, and it doesn't make you a failure. It just makes you a human being who's trying to just live life and get along, right? And maybe healing actually begins when you stop judging what you did in the past, the survival version of yourself that you live with for so long, and you start just gently asking the questions. That's what she or he needed at that time, to survive. I lost certain pieces of who I was at that time, but I found myself again, and this is my voice, and I'm ready to just keep moving forward, right? And we should do that. Absolutely, we should move on. So, survival mode, like we said in the beginning, it keeps you functioning for quite some time. And then finally, the fantasy cracks, right? The fog lifts and boom, truth bomb. And then you're faced with reality and you're like, damn, this is crazy. Like, what was I doing all this time? And once that happens, there's no going back. You don't want to go back. It's actually a nightmare to think about going back. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about not going back. the point of no return. All right. It's the moment that denial's no longer working anymore. It's you finally know the truth. You finally can't keep pretending anymore. You're not going to keep fixing a broken vase with glue that it's no longer working. You've decided, forget it. I'm not doing this anymore, you know? And you can't keep bargaining with something that's already broken. So sometimes we just need to shut the door, right? We need to leave things when they become painful. And that's what we're talking about next. It doesn't always happen easily, though. I mean, how many of you can remember a time that you've absolutely said, you know what, I'm leaving now. Something goes wrong and you just shut the door and you move on. I'm done. I'm done with this. Most of the time, that doesn't happen that way. Most of the time, the same damn door keeps getting reopened. I mean, it gets to the point where it's like a broken record. You continue to go over and over. You know what? Okay, let's start again. Okay, let's start again. It's like that movie, Happy Death Day, like when it keeps replaying and you're just like, dude, like, why am I here again? Why are we doing this again? That's what it becomes. So there does come a point eventually where you shut that door and you move on with your life. And some of you have experienced this. Some of you have done that in a relationship in your life. But boy, sometimes it takes a brutal kick in the face to do that, right? I mean, I know for me, I had to get slapped, kicked. I mean, and not for real slapped kick, but it was like I needed a big swift kick to my face, you know, to really snap out of this little dream world I was living in, the survival mode that I had set myself in. That's what we're going to talk about next. I hope that this episode resonated with you. And if it did, I would appreciate it if you shared with your friends and family, you liked the post, you subscribe to my page. Really, this page is about just sharing something common with all of you. And if somebody is going through something, maybe I can help them just by sharing my story. So until then, and until we tackle more uncomfortable truths we avoid, I'll see you next time.